The American dream. It's this huge, powerful idea that's been shaping the US for almost 100 years. But what does it actually mean anymore? Is it still about a house with a white picket fence? Or is it something more? So let's unpack that, shall we? Now, this whole phrase was actually coined way back in 1931 by a guy named James Truslow Adams. And get this, it was right in the thick of the Great Depression. His vision wasn't about getting rich, it was about potential. The idea that anyone, no matter who their parents were or how much money they had, could become the best version of themselves. I mean, for that time, that was a pretty radical thought. And that really brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today. Here we are, almost a century later. Is that dream still alive? And maybe, more importantly, who actually gets to live it? Let's take a look. All right, first up, let's talk about a part of the American dream story that we don't always like to talk about, failure. Because it turns out that for some of the biggest success stories we know, the journey didn't start with a win. It started with a pretty major setback. Okay, think about Michael Jordan, probably the greatest basketball player of all time, right? Well, it's kind of hard to believe, but as a sophomore in high school, he didn't make the varsity team. He got cut. He was totally devastated. But you know what? That rejection lit a fire in him that basically changed the history of sports. And you can hear it straight from the man himself. Jordan didn't just tolerate his failures, he embraced them. All those thousands of missed shots, all those lost games, he saw them as the very reason he succeeded. For him, failure wasn't the end of the road, it was just fuel. Or how about J.K. Rowling? Before she gave us the entire world of Harry Potter, her own world was pretty much falling apart. She was a single mom, completely broke, living on government assistance, and that book that would go on to sell hundreds of millions of copies, it was rejected by 12 different publishers. 12! And then, of course, there's Oprah. Early in her career, a producer actually told her she was unfit for television news. She was fired from her anchor job, which had to be just humiliating. But that failure is exactly what pushed her into daytime TV, where she didn't just find another job, she went on to build a global empire. So these stories, they're not just about bouncing back. They lead us to two of the most powerful, almost mythic examples of the American dream in history. These are people who didn't just overcome a hurdle, they turned the absolute worst circumstances imaginable into legendary success. First, you have to hear the story of Madam C.J. Walker. I mean, just look at this timeline. She was born right after the Civil War to parents who had been enslaved. She was an orphan by the time she was 7. As a young woman, she was working as a laundress, making barely $1 a day. And from literally nothing, she saw a need, created her own line of hair care products, and built a business that made her America's first documented female self-made millionaire. It's just an absolutely astounding story. And bringing it into our time, we have Oprah. What just hits you when you see this is the incredible scale of the contrast. To go from rural poverty and a really traumatic childhood to being called the queen of all media and becoming the world's first black billionaire. Her story really is a modern version of that dream, built on connection, media, and massive influence. So we have these powerful stories, these incredible icons. But what do people today think the American dream is actually made of? Let's switch gears a little bit from the anecdotes to the analysis. So, a 2021 study did just that. Researchers actually went out and asked people, and they found that the American dream isn't just one thing. It's more like a recipe with 6 core ingredients. The idea that hard work pays off, having personal freedom, the chance to move up in the world, that's social mobility, having enough material comfort, strong family ties, and finally, the freedom to just be yourself. Now, of all those ingredients, this one right here, social mobility, that's really the beating heart of the classic American dream. It's the core belief that your starting point in life doesn't have to be your destiny. It's that promise of moving up that has inspired so many people for so long. But, and this is a big but, here's where the story starts to get a lot more complicated. Because even if we know the ingredients in the recipe, it turns out not everyone believes you can actually bake the cake anymore. And we're seeing a major split right down generational lines. That same 2021 study found a really clear divide. As you can see here, older generations, so we're talking baby boomers and Gen X, they were way more likely to either believe in the American dream or at least feel kind of neutral about it. But then you look at the younger folks, millennials and Gen Z, and you see a much higher number of them rejecting the whole idea completely. And let's put a number on it. Younger people in this study were 2.4 times more likely to be skeptical about the dream. That's not a small gap. That is a massive shift in perspective. So the real question is, why? Well, this quote from one of the millennial participants really gets to the heart of it. For a lot of younger people, that whole pull yourself up by your bootstrap story feels like a myth that's used to ignore the bigger things holding people back. You know, systemic issues like inequality that can make it feel impossible to get ahead, no matter how hard you work. So where does that leave us? Is the dream just dead? Or is it maybe just changing? The research seems to suggest it's probably the second one. The dream isn't disappearing, it's being reimagined for a new era. And maybe that's the key takeaway here. There's no longer one single cookie-cutter American dream. The path is becoming way more personal, more individual. As one Gen Z participant said, my age group is more able to expand on ideas, and no, not everything is set in stone, and the American dream changes. So from an ideal born in the Great Depression, to the epic stories of icons who failed their way to the top, to a modern idea that's being pulled apart and re-examined, the American dream is still this incredibly powerful, evolving force, which leads to the final and most important question of all. What does it mean to you?